The state, not the PKK, has factions. A column by Frederike Geerdink. It's been a month of complicated developments in Turkey. It started early this month, during the opening of the parliamentary year. An ultra-nationalist leader shook the hands of Dem Party MPs, his arch-enemies. October was concluded with the arrest of Ahmet Özer, the Kurdish CHP mayor of Istanbul's Esenyurt municipality, who is being accused of having ties with terrorism. Two seemingly totally contradictory events. What does the state want, one might ask? Peace with the Kurds or war with the Kurds? The factions in the state don't agree. Factions within the state? This may sound weird because those are usually not the terms used when a state is being discussed. But I like to turn things upside down now and then to shed a light on developments and realities. The factions within the state are usually referred to as political parties. Calling them political parties gives the impression that they all have different solutions for Turkish problems. You may expect of them that they distinguish themselves especially on issues that touch the core of the country. Say, the Kurdish issue. But on the Kurdish issue, they basically all agree and form a front. The established parties, like the AKP and MHP, which are in a coalition government, and the parties that are considered to be the opposition, like CHP, Zafer Partisi, Victory Party, and EE Party, Good Party. None of them has ever proposed any other solution to the Kurdish issue than to eradicate terrorism. Sure, both AKP and CHP have had periods in which they proposed democratization as the way forward, but that was mainly inspired by, respectively, the will to strengthen presidential power or to win elections. I'm slightly simplifying, but this is what it boils down to. These parties are all fierce supporters of the Republic of Turkey in its current form, which is extremely nationalist, militarist, putting the state's interest above the individual's interest, autocratic, racist. You could sum that up in one word: fascist. None of the parties has ever suggested to end fascism to solve the Kurdish issue. They tend to differ slightly in the way they want to suppress the opposition, another characteristic of fascism. Bombing the armed resistance movement to smithereens, that's what all factions agree upon. They all call it terrorism, and the more terrorists are rendered ineffective, the better. Less unified are the factions about locking up unarmed activists and politicians. They also don't all agree on the tactic of replacing elected mayors by trustees and throwing the elected mayors in jail. The factions' positions, however, may shift depending on which activist it is and to which faction they belong, and on the political realities of the decade, month, or day. This is basically what is playing out this month. How shall we suppress PKK leader Öcalan? By proposing to hang him? By keeping him jailed indefinitely? Or by ridiculing him? By suggesting he comes to parliament to declare the end of terrorism and parrot the state's deepest wish? How shall we give the Kurds the impression that we are willing to listen to their demands? By shaking their elected representative hands? By visiting their biggest city in the southeast of the country, but without making concrete proposals, or by suggesting their ultimate leader can speak in parliament without giving him actual freedom of speech. Erdogan is struggling, I have heard from several commentators this month. He wants to get the Kurds on his side. In general, two reasons are mentioned for this. First is that he wants to run for president for the third time and needs Kurdish parliamentary support for the required constitutional change. Second is that the Middle East is on fire and he wants to unite the country, for example against his latest delusion, which is that Israel is out to occupy parts of Turkey. But now the Kurds are divided. The PKK has factions. The PKK attack in Ankara on 23 October shows that clearly, commentators claim. After all, the AKP-MHP government is looking for rapprochement with the Kurds, has finally allowed Öcalan to receive a family visit and shook Kurdish MPs' hands. And now the PKK is throwing a spanner in the works. This attack was clearly done, the logic is, by a faction within the PKK that doesn't want to strike a deal with the state on Erdogan's terms. There are no such factions within the PKK, they are a front. As the PKK already said in the statement with which they claimed the attack in Ankara, the attack didn't have anything to do with the freshest political developments. This makes sense. Such an attack requires quite some preparation and can't be organized in 2 weeks. It was instead part of the ongoing war since 1984 between the PKK and the state. The war against all the factions within the state that keep supporting fascism. It's only logical that there is discussion within the armed movement about the best approach to secure the democratization that is needed to end the armed struggle once and for all. But to think there is a faction that wants to strike a deal on Erdogan's terms is frankly absurd, and that they would communicate with one another via an attack on a military target in Ankara is too. A deal on Erdogan's terms would mean surrender. The PKK does not surrender. It is Erdogan himself who is throwing a spanner in the works. The AKP-MHP faction within the state, I should say. After all, if the AKP-MHP faction wants to win the Kurds over for one reason or another, it should consider to stop being a state faction and propose a radical solution. Stop bombing Kurdish lands in Turkey, Iraq and Syria, for starters. Get the negotiating table from the dungeons of the palace and invite Öcalan and the leadership in Kandil to it. Be transparent and give power to parliament. Invite an independent third actor to oversee the process. Stop being merely a faction of the state. Frederike Geerdink is an independent journalist. Follow her on Twitter or subscribe to her weekly newsletter Expert Kurdistan. The link is in her Twitter bio.